Hello! Today is day 6 of my summer CSS challenge, and today I was planning on making a layout that looked something like this. Again, shout out to Kevin Powell for his Scrimba CSS course. This design is taken from there, so please, if you're interested in CSS at all, I recommend that you go check out Kevin Powell and all of his CSS videos. They are excellent. So let's get started. As usual, I created a new folder for today, set up the HTML document, set up the CSS document, and made sure that they were properly linked. So we've got these 4 colors right here, and I think I could just make those into CSS variables right off the bat. We've got our typography information over here. We know that the layout has a max width of this much, so obviously we're going to need a container for the whole thing. So we're going to put the entire thing in a container. And then we've got, I'm going to say this is an H1, and then there's an image, and then it looks like there's 2 kind of rows, 1, 2, and then each row has a separate amount of columns. This first one has 3 columns, and this one has 2 columns. And it looks like you could almost divide them into quarters. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, where each one is the same length. So like this would take up 25% of the space, this would take up 50%, this would take up 25, and this takes up 75, and this takes up 25. So what I could do is just have 2 sections where it's like the top row and the bottom row. I guess 2 divs in that case. And then from there, I think size them using percentage widths. And then if we used a flexbox layout, then we could use a media query to convert it to a single streamlined document after the screen size shrinks to less than a certain amount. So yeah, let's go for it. So I went ahead and laid out the main HTML for the whole document, including a main container that I was going to use to resize everything to a set max width of 980 pixels. And then I used Unsplash to source an image of about 1000 by 300, which I change a little bit later as well. From there, I used sections to create the little rows for the top half and the bottom half with the paragraphs and whatnot, and I set up the appropriate columns as well as a size modifier class for those columns so that I could size the first column to be 25% of the width, the second one to be 50, third one to be 25, and then for the second row, the first row to be 75% of the width, and then like the last little box to be another 25%. After I laid out all of the HTML, I took a quick look at how the document was doing so far, and then I started getting ready with all of the CSS that I was going to write. Once I switched over to the CSS style sheet, first thing I did was set up variables for the different colors that I'd be using, because I didn't want to keep cross-referencing the hex code. From there, I set up a typography section with the body setting the font size and the color, with the H1, H2, and the little span inside of the H1 for the emphasis text. From there, I set up the column class to have a display of flex so that every single column within the section for the top half and the bottom half would be laid out in a column manner. After that, I set the max width, I set the display colors, and I set a couple of margin and padding information for each of the columns, as well as center aligning the title so that everything would be appropriately spaced out and it wouldn't look like all of the words were squished up right next to each other. Here you can see me doing the same thing for a couple different things, for the top versus the bottom separation, and then furthermore I was setting the width so that we'd have some space so that when I justified content with space between, the columns would spread out a little bit more evenly. After that, I went on and resized the window to see where the content and layout were actually breaking. So like if you made it smaller than a certain amount, the words were just getting really squished and the columns were getting really small. I realized that was somewhere around 800 pixels, so I set up a media query at 800 pixels for the flex layout to change to a column direction so that everything would be one on top of each other instead of trying to squish everything right next to each other. Yeah, that should do it. So now, even if it's really skinny, it's doesn't really go off screen. Yeah, it stays on screen for the most part. Like here, you can't really help it. I mean, I guess I could put in another media query, but like all the text is still on there. So at this point, I wouldn't even worry about it. And then here, it actually expands and becomes this. So yeah, I think that's good. All right. So that'll be the extent of today's layout. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.